Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Frank Quinn, Director of Preservation for Heritage Ohio, and today marks the beginning of what I think is going to be a fascinating series of webinars, a rehab story. We're interested in bringing you the compelling stories of preservation and adaptive use from across the state of Ohio, and we're kicking that series off today. So I would, well, let's see, if you have an idea for a rehab story that you'd like us to feature in the coming months, let me know. You can email me at fquinn@heritageohio.org. And now for my tech spiel. GoToWebinar is great when it works, and that's not always. However, if you're having problems, before throwing that laptop out the window and letting oncoming traffic pulverize it to bits, try this. Close the program and then log back on. That might improve things and save you from having to purchase a new laptop. So today's rehab story focuses on the historic Hartong Farmstead located in the city of Green. It's a farm with a storied history, and in just the last few months, really, local stakeholders have begun writing the next chapter in that history. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Haring with the City of Green, Rachel Bellis, farmer extraordinaire, and Tracy Emrick with Cuyahoga County Countryside, who also, I just learned, is a practicing farmer. Very cool. So hello and welcome, ladies. I will just mention to our webinar attendees, feel free to type in any questions that you have over the course of the presentations. We'll go ahead and take a look at those and answer those once our third presenter finishes up. So at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, Frank. Thanks for having us today.
Hey, you're welcome.
My name is Sarah Haring, and I work as the Community Development Administrator for the City of Green. I am one of a very large team of people at the city who have worked on this initiative for quite a long time. So I feel privileged to be the one to talk about it, probably the one that talks about it the most often anyway. So thanks for having us and giving us an opportunity to share. I'm going to, as part of my presentation, sort of sketch the background for the other two ladies who will present after me. This story for the City of Green begins between the years 2004, 2006, when we purchased what was then, interestingly enough, Southgate Farm. It was, give or take, 200 acres of an impressive inventory of all things nature. It has wetlands and bogs and just an extraordinary array of nature. Has within it many miles of walking trails. And so this is the park in the City of Green that you go to when you need tranquility, when you need some peace and beauty. It's just an absolutely pristine green space. And when we acquired that land, and I need to say too that the leadership, the administration at that time, really saw the acquisition as an extraordinary opportunity to preserve and protect that natural habitat, and essentially took it out of play for development. It was beautiful green space that we wanted to keep as green space, and that's important to know for later on. Part of the property came with not just trees and deer and flowers and bogs, but a complex of historic buildings that we call the Levi J. Hartong Farmstead. And Frank, if you'll go to the next slide, you will see an aerial view, an old aerial view, and hopefully the GIS administrator at the city is not watching this because the north arrow is pointing south, so you'll have to reorient yourself here just a bit. But this is essentially the farmstead and how it sits within the park. There is one piece of the farmstead that you can't see. It's a funerary, the burial site for the very first family that we know of that lived on this property, not the family that built the structures, but family before that. So the very first thing that we did in terms of these structures after purchasing Southgate Farm, now Southgate Park, now again partly Southgate Farm, was to list these structures on the National Register of Historic Places. In November 2017, we were successful in doing that. That was an exciting time for the city, our first National Register listing, not our last, but our first. Next, and then I'm going to take you through each one of the buildings just very quickly. This is the Farmhouse, East Lake Victorian. I know that because I have people around me who tell me that that's the case. The next slide is our very beautiful barn. The next slide is the summer kitchen. And then next slide is the chicken coop. The milk and well house is next. And last but not least, the agricultural outbuilding. After these structures were listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the very next step that we took was to undertake a feasibility study. And if you'll go to the next slide, you will see that we are beginning to build a case for why we needed to have a use for these structures. So the feasibility study helped us understand our buildings. It helped us understand what we needed to do in the immediate to make sure that they were safe, warm, and dry. They also gave us a timeline for some projects that were eventually going to need to be addressed. It also gave us an idea of the footprint, perhaps what was the original footprint for the farmhouse and summer kitchen, also internally in the farmhouse for circulation. It also enabled us to begin the conversation about use. What were we going to do with these buildings? And that was a conversation that was years in the making. So the next slide, you will see our very first rehabilitation project was the demolition, called it selective demolition, of a circa 1970 apartment building that literally connected the farmhouse to the summer kitchen. And all of our research indicated that that apartment building was not there originally. Indeed, the farmhouse and the summer kitchen were separate structures. And so that was our first big project. The next one, in the next slide, we replaced the roof and the gutter and the downspouts on both the farmhouse and the summer kitchen. The next slide shows probably the most comprehensive project we've taken on to date, and that was the replacement of the barn roof. It was a whole lot more than just replacing a roof. There were many components to that structure. It took us a long time. There were a lot of feels about the kind of materials that we were going to use, but we're just absolutely delighted with the outcome. And concurrently, while we were doing that roof project, if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that we were also very thoughtfully replacing barn timbers. You can't see him very well. He's on the first floor of the barn, but we were really fortunate to be introduced to Rudy Christian, who is a master timber framer. He has, as I can only characterize it as, he has loved on our barn on and off for years. He's one of those craftsmen that walks in a building and understands its history and understands what it's been used for and how it's been maybe even fixed or fixed not well, and all those kinds of things. So while the roof was being rehabbed, he was working on the interior to replace some strategic timbers. This doesn't represent all the work that he's done for us, but this was a significant one. The next slide, and probably the last exterior project, most recent that we've undertaken, was exterior repairs to the farmhouse. There were some things that needed to be replaced and rehabbed, in the intricate outer work and painting and things like that. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to hang here for just a second and say, if you were paying attention to all those dollar signs that were going by, you understand that not unreasonably, we got to the point where the question, what are you going to use this for, was becoming more and more pressing. We had an idea early on in our ownership of the historic buildings. We thought that the farmhouse might serve as public restroom for folks who are using the trail system, and then exhibit space on the first floor that could either be for historic preservation or it could be for ecological purposes. But as we kind of sat and lived with the property for a while, it just didn't seem to fit. Southgate in of itself is remote. The Hartong Farmstead is kind of buried in there. If you don't know exactly where you're going, you may or may not come across it while you're walking back there. One of the things that I've heard a lot this last year from people who visit Rachel's produce stand is, I didn't even know this was back here. And so when you think about producing an exhibit space or coming up with an exhibit space that's got a good return on investment, that's got a lot of energy and people coming and parking, it just didn't sit well. It was a good idea. We just weren't sure it was the best and highest use. And I remember talking about Southgate at the Living Green Task Force meeting one night, our city sustainability group. And the conversation was mostly about education, the natural education that's available out there. But I mentioned to the group that we were struggling with how to use the structures. And I want to stop here too and say that the barn for many, many years was used to house horses, Summit County Sheriff Mounted Unit. And we were really fortunate to have them. And that was a great use, but only used the barn. And so we continued to search to think, how can we use all of these structures? And at the end of that meeting, the chair of the task force, Kyle Lucas, asked me if I had ever heard of Cuyahoga Valley National Park, the Countryside Initiative. And I guess that discussion was the beginning of the beginning, beginning of the end. The next day in the office, I did some research. I read their mission statement, their vision statement. I read the stories about the farms, the farmsteads that they had rehabbed in the national park, and how they had invited farmers to lease these properties and begin a sustainable agricultural initiative, growing local food, tending to the soil, being earth keepers. being the kind of folks that understood not just about the food that they were growing, but really sensitive to and caring about the environment that they were in. And that's exactly what we were looking for. So I called them, and they very graciously invited a group of us to come visit them. We sat probably 3 or 4 hours all told that day, carefully and thoughtfully walking us through their history, their process, their goals for the future. They took us to see one of the farms, the blueberry farm that was in play. And we went home encouraged and excited, but we invited them to come see our farmstead. We wanted to have some confirmation that we had a site that would work as well. So they did that. They came and visited. And I remember Tracy saying, as I've said, as almost everybody says who goes back there, I want to live here. So we did get the confirmation that this was a great site for this kind of initiative. And they've been our partners all the way through this. And Rachel was our second try. That is a story all in of itself. I'm not sure we have time for that. We tried this in 2014 and then again in 19. And Countryside has generously given us guidance and encouragement. I will just quite honestly tell you that we just borrowed their template for just about everything. And they were happy for us to do that. We made a few tweaks so that it was pertinent to our property. But their goal really is to replicate what they do. And we were so glad that they had that attitude and that they were willing to invest the time in us. And they weren't the only partners that we had. Frank, if you'll go to the next slide, we have reached out to several partners. We have a lot of city partners, Parks and Recreation Board, the Historic Preservation Commission, the Green Historical Society, and of course our administration at the city is really supportive of this. But then our more regional partners, Cleveland Museum of Natural History, they actually own part of Southgate Park with us, and our stewards of Singer Lake Bog, which is contiguous about 322 acres of really pristine bogland. They were advocates for this. Amanda, I love her quote from the Historic Preservation Office. She says, "We fully support the city's efforts to restore not only the buildings, but the original use of the farmstead." And I really loved that. It was a farm, and it's a farm again. And I think that is the highest and best use that we could find. We wanted a use that not just was about farming, though. We wanted someone who would be an earth keeper for all of the things that are around it and that would engage with our community. We wanted it to be something that everybody in Green felt like they were a part of. And I feel like we've accomplished that with this initiative. The next slide is a quote from Tracy. And Frank, I'm just going to tell you, go ahead and set Tracy's presentation up because I think this is a really good time to pivot to Countryside. They're the ones who created this template and had the vision for what we're doing. And we're so glad to be a partner with them. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions now or at the end, but Tracy, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay.
Great. I think I've got Tracy's slide up. By all means, take it away.
All right. Well, first, Sarah, you said everything so eloquently and completely. I think you did such a great job for getting me started here. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you all to share a little bit. And I can't tell you how much excitement I see every time I look at Southgate Farm on social media. It just warms my heart because this is truly the spirit of the Countryside Initiative program, as our founder and director, Darwin Kelsey, had envisioned when he worked with the National Park Service to create this program back in the late 1990s. So I'm Tracy Emrick, and I am now the current CEO. I was selected to be the CEO after the passing of our founder, Darwin Kelsey. So certainly giant shoes to fill that will never be filled. He was a visionary and certainly my mentor. This program was created to do what Sarah just explained. It was really about how do you take these wonderful historic spaces and rehabilitating one beautiful historic space is always a challenge, like it is, like you saw with Southgate. There was a lot of investment in that project, but when you have dozens of them, as was the challenge here in Cuyahoga Valley National Park, it became a bigger issue. Having a living history museum is one thing, but having 14 of them in a 3 square mile area, it could be a little much. So they really had to think outside the box. So the superintendent at the time had been to Europe and saw how public-private relationships in their national parks had worked for many generations, and wondered if we could do that here. Through a series of connections, he was introduced to our founder, Darwin, and Darwin had some ideas, and together they created the Countryside Initiative program, and our organization was created. Our name is Countryside, and we're a nonprofit partner with the National Park. Our mission is to build a thriving local food community by connecting people, food, and land here in Cuyahoga Valley National Park, but also beyond. And Darwin's vision was to create a model here in the park that we could share with the world. Certainly share with our community, share with the visitors of the national park, but even more broadly. And so for us to be able to meet with Sarah and the folks from Green and have them come in and visit us was a wonderful opportunity, but even more so when we found out that they were really going to bring this project to life. So if you want to hit the next slide there. We have 3 goals in our organization, and the first is preserving farmland. That's our core, and this is really where we coalesced with the City of Green and Southgate. What we'd like to see is to be able to take these special places, have them rehabilitated, and get farmers on the land again. Here in the park, there were literally almost, I think the last recollection of what Darwin said, I think it was about 80 some farmsteads in the national park when they first started working on this plan. They had been sitting, a lot of them had been sitting vacant for a very long time. They had started deteriorating, and they really had to go in and identify which ones they could salvage. And because during that time there was a lot of federal funding for preservation, they were able to restore, specifically for this program, 14 buildings, 14 farmsteads. And of that, we currently have 10 farms in the program. And the concept is really just what Southgate has done. It's the idea that we get these spaces ready to be lived in, and then we ask for people to submit a proposal of how they would farm that property. And then with a team of evaluators, the properties, they choose a farm to lease that property. And so, like I said, we have 10 farms in the program now, and they range in size from a tiny little 2-acre farm to over 30 acres. And they do everything from, we have a winery to a medicinal herb farm, to several specialty crop and livestock operations. So it's a very eclectic mix. And like Sarah said, these are like-minded people who believe in not only being farmers, but being stewards of the land. They value the ecosystem, and they want their farm businesses to mirror their values. So it's been a wonderful partnership. We've been doing it for 20 years. And it has kind of evolved and led us into, not only do we share that model with hundreds of folks every year, that we also started working directly to cultivate that next generation of farmer. You want to hit the next slide there? So through this process, we brought in the primary audience of people who are interested in the program are first generation farmers. They're either transitioning from another career, or they're young people who have decided that they want to make ecologically sustainable farming their life's path. So coming into this program, we found out that it would be great if we could incorporate agricultural education. And so we work with partners all across the state through our extension office, soil and water, NRCS, and we bring experts around to help us teach workshops and classes. And then we launched in 2018 a beginning farmer program. And this is a way for us to bring interns in at all different levels of experience, kind of get them aware of what farming really takes. I'm sure Rachel will chime in on that in a bit. And then once they kind of get to that point where they really are committed to being a farmer, they move into the next level, which is getting them out on real farms and working as interns there. And then, just moving them forward in these phases so that eventually our goal is to really help them find opportunities like the one that the City of Green has offered, and get them on their farm of their own. And then the third thing that we do, if you want to go to the next slide, is really connecting people to food. And in 2004, as a way to help our farmers in the park, we started a farmers market program in the national park. And we knew that we needed to bring farmers in from all over the region if we wanted that farmers market to be successful. And at that time, there were very few farmers markets in Ohio. So it really took off and grew. And now we have 80 plus small farm and food businesses that participate in our farmers market programs. They net plus or minus $1 million in gross revenue each year. So it's a wonderful local economic boost, and really fosters the idea of local food, healthy food, getting people to know where their food comes from. And it's just very engaging opportunity for us to connect with our consumer. We do some informal education through our markets, showing people that how to use and prepare seasonal food, talk about the difference between, buying something that comes from, across the country versus buying something that comes from the farmer in your community. And then we also have a very unique food access program that has grown exponentially since 2009 when we launched it. So we work with providers of SNAP and WIC to have nutrition incentive programs, provide low-income families additional dollars for fruits and vegetables. So all of our farmers markets except SNAP, we have a WIC voucher relationship with our public health department, and that has just been, unfortunately, especially this year, the need has just skyrocketed. So, but it's just one way that we can help until the idea of building a truly healthy and resilient food system takes hold. We'll do all we can to help that process out. You want to go to the next slide? All right, so I wrote this quote. I wasn't sure how we were going to present or if I would get a chance to present, but as I mentioned, especially this year, highlighting what's happened with COVID and talking about food justice, it's so important right now that we protect these spaces, that we help to cultivate our next generation of farmers, and everything that the City of Green has done to bring Justin and Sarah to Southgate Farm, exactly that. It's the epitome of what Darwin's vision was, of what Countryside's vision is. it's really how we're going to save our food system for the future. So just kudos to all of you guys. I think it's really incredible. And I think from this point, we can go ahead and move on with Rachel, unless anyone has any questions.
Great. All right. I will go ahead and switch out presentations.
Okay.
Super.
Thanks, Frank.
You're welcome.
And wow, that was really awesome to hear the full perspective from Sarah and Tracy. I don't think I've ever heard the full story, Sarah, and it gives me a new appreciation for how excited I am already to be here. But I mean, it's been a long journey on your guys' end to have this ultimate result this year, I guess. And I'm so excited about everything Countryside's doing too. I mean, that is entirely why I got involved with sustainable farming in the first place. And I think it's really cool. So my name's Rachel, Rachel Bellis, and my husband's also pictured up there. His name's Justin. We moved into the farm in, well, the beginning of April this year. We went through that application process that Tracy and Sarah kind of alluded to. It started in the fall of last year in 2019. We were notified that we were selected to, I don't know, lease the farm. I think it was Christmas Eve that the mayor and Sarah called me, and we took a couple months kind of figuring things out and worked it out, and here we are. So I have a lot of slides, so you're gonna get tired of hearing me say like, let's go to the next slide. I just have a few pictures from the jobs that I had working on farms. Like Tracy said about the Farmers in the Countryside program, I am a first generation farmer. I grew up in the suburbs, got interested in this, started interning on farms after I graduated college, and continued working on them for, I don't know, like 6 years or something like that. So this is just kind of my background, working on diversified, sustainable farms kind of all over the country. You can move to the next slide. My husband and I actually left our jobs in 2019, and we went to Europe and started this program where we worked and lived on organic farms, kind of in exchange for room and board, and to learn a little bit more, to try these different operations out and to travel while we did it. And he did not have a lot of hands-on experience farming, so that was kind of his road into it. He is an engineer, and he's still an engineer. I'm the one who is the day in, day out at the farmstead here. But so we were all over Europe doing all kinds of things, like working at a dairy in the Alps where I was making cheese in that bottom picture, or all kinds of things. So that was where we were coming from when we first heard about the Hartong initiative and their search for the right farmers to move in. We were going to be moving back to the US, didn't really know where we were going to go, what we were going to do. I was kind of hitting this point where I felt like I was really ready to start my own farming business. Finally had the confidence and skill set that I felt like I really was excited to do that. I was working as the assistant crop production manager for an organic farm in Cincinnati for several years prior to this trip. And so it just kind of, all the pieces fell together at the right time, it felt like, hearing about this opportunity and being selected for it and moving home kind of all at once. And yeah, so let's move on to kind of my story so far at Hartong. We moved in, right, like I said, at the beginning of April. I think it was actually our third or fourth night in the house that a small tornado came through the park and knocked down a ton of trees. We were lucky to not have any structural damage, but that was kind of scary. And the park was actually closed to the public for the entire month of April while they cleaned that up. So kind of a unique experience to start off with. We had some lovely early April weather with my plants on the front porch and seeding things on the other porch. That's the historic plaque that you can kind of see in the first picture there, just blown up. You can move to the next slide. Within a couple of days, we had other Ohio April weather, and all those plants moved inside the house and got to see, I don't know, I just wanted to share some beautiful pictures of the farmstead with snow, I guess. So you can, I mean, I started all those plants back at my parents' house before we moved into the farmstead. Like, I don't know, I started in February or March. I was very excited for the opportunity to start my own business. I really wanted to hit the ground running when we could get the keys to the farm. You can move on now. This is when we first started planting out in the field. So I don't think that the other ladies really talked much about the area that we're renting besides the buildings themselves. There's a large kind of slightly rolling hills field. It's almost 20 acres of rented land that we have access to, that is kind of along the long gravel drive that is up towards the farm buildings. So we had a area of that turned into a garden this year. It's about, I don't know, half an acre in size, and that is my primary production area. We're hoping to use a lot of the rest of the field to graze grass-fed livestock in the future. I think it would be just really lovely for grass-fed beef and sheep, I mean, lamb, what's the word? But anyway, we have lots of ideas about what to do agriculturally, and the opportunities are kind of endless. And at the same time, kind of when we first moved in and we're starting to try and get things in the ground, I had a elaborate grow light set up in our downstairs bathroom. So the farm was moving in the farmhouse too, a little bit. You can move on from here. We had a little cold snap in May, and those big bay windows and that you can kind of see from the outside pictures of the farmhouse came in handy for sure with all of our cold sensitive crops that we had started hanging out inside so we could put them in the field. You can kind of keep moving. Let me see what my next slide is. We were really excited to get to start some adventures of having our own farm. We got our own chicks, and they went from a cardboard box in our bathroom to the chicken coop when they were a little bit bigger, where they had a rabbit hutch. You can move to the next slide and you'll see that I've got just another picture of the exterior of the chicken coop. I can't see it changing over.
Yeah, it's not advancing.
Too many pictures. It's my fault.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you go. I knew we would get there eventually. Anyway, the chicken coop is now a chicken coop again. We've got, just a handful of birds to kind of learn the ropes and have eggs for ourselves. We might expand into more commercial production in the future. People seem to really enjoy seeing them walking through the park and ask us all kinds of questions because we have different breeds and we let them free range during the day around the yard, and it just looks like a proper farm with a few chickens running around. So you can move on from here. Just got a couple of pretty pictures I took, sharing our experience, I guess.
There we go.
Yeah. So this is on the left is I'm sorry. I have dogs that ran inside and were formerly outside. I have the pasture on the left, and that is one of the equipment shed, one of the barns that's got a bunch of spring wildflowers. You can move on. I've got some other pictures of our of the main barn, the city I was talking about, was restored. That's kind of the inside structure, really beautiful how they've fixed it up, and the view of the house from inside. From there, you can see that's how we're using the barn this year, I guess. We forayed with some trepidation into a little bit of events within the space with this kind of weird COVID year, but we're doing yoga in the barn every Saturday morning. We have an instructor come help, and that's been one way that we've shared the space with the community. And I'd like to kind of expand more classes and events in that space in the future. Can move on and get a close up of one of my first farm stands in the spring. It's very exciting to see that come to fruition. You can move on to the next slide. Just more spring crops, things that I was growing in the garden: spinach and Swiss chard and kohlrabi and radishes. Can move on from here. And we just have the goats that somehow ended up living with us here on the farm. So they are characters that people enjoy visiting with. And they certainly seem to enjoy living in the historic barn too. We had some community involvement. Local Girl Scout troop kind of helped us put together these raised beds over the summer. There's a program where students at Green High School need volunteer hours, and they've been helping me in the garden quite a bit, and I've been enjoying that. Can move on to the next slide. Some of summer's crops. I mean, vegetables you've all seen before. We keep going. That's another one of the Green High School students that helped me at the farm stand. The farm stand, there was a really great community response for that. I think that it just felt good to have foot traffic on the farm and have people become more aware of that space in general too. Can move on to the next slide, please. Oh, we got pigs a couple months ago, and that's been really fun. And you know, it's just it's a wild ride. We keep collecting new projects, and there's so many different opportunities to use this land to its fullest potential, I think. And we're really enjoying eating our own food that we can produce and sharing it with others and getting people excited about local and sustainable food production. We can move to our next slide. Oh, this is kind of our recent update on the chickens. They just started laying the baby chicks, and you know, that's kind of just them out in the yard hunting for bugs. And the next slide is just one of the most recent farm stands, kind of all of summer's bounty. Like I said, I came from a background where I was mostly working with organic vegetable production, so that's kind of where my heart is, but I am really enjoying seeing more animals on the farm too. Sorry, excuse me. And that's my last slide. So, you know, I'm really excited to see what the future holds.
Great, thanks a lot. 3 fascinating presentations. I will go ahead and open it up for questions, and let's see what we have. So let's see. Well, there's a comment. They put shutters on the chicken coop? Which even chickens deserve shutters, right?
Right.
So question, I think there's a lot of questions on the dollars and cents side of things. Question about the farm being a break-even operation or not.
Is that directed at me or towards the city recouping their investment?
Well, I guess you could look at that from a couple different angles as far as, yeah, if Sarah could speak to how they feel about the city, how the lease works for them. And then, yeah, Rachel, as far as your own, I guess, benchmarks for what you wanted to accomplish and whether, I mean, I guess dollars and cents enters into it, but are there some bigger overarching goals to focus on?
We do have in the lease agreement, there is a rent structure. So Rachel and Justin, there's a rent fee every month. They are also responsible for utility bills. And that's the end of my story about dollars and cents. I'm the worst one in the world to address that particular topic, but I think it is a bigger picture. We always knew that we were going to rehabilitate the structures. Tearing them down was never an option. And so to have a use that is so vibrant and really is in keeping with the spirit of the reason we purchased the property in the first place is a value I don't think you can put dollars and cents on. And this isn't even our first year. She moved in April. I was telling the others before we went live that there have been some projects since Rachel and Justin moved in. The house kind of woke up and said, "Oh, somebody's living here. Wait." So there have been some things that we've had to catch up with. We weren't surprised by that. They're old buildings and they haven't been lived in for a while. So to us, we hope that at some point in time, the big ticket items are taken care of, and some of them already are, the roof. But to us, to have somebody living there and being a steward of the buildings and the property and sharing it with the community is really valuable. Can't put a price on that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Tracy, I wonder if you can speak to, again, maybe a bigger topic, a bigger overarching issue. So this model has worked with pairing land in a public park with a private farm operation. With the city, it's worked with a city-owned property being paired with a private farm operation. Do you see a day where a similar kind of initiative can be used to match privately held farmland with the same kind of first generation farmer, as Rachel put it?
Yeah, those types of matchings are going on all over the country right now. There are farm links where we try to find landowners who are getting ready to retire. They don't have any heirs for their farm and they would love to keep it in agriculture. We try to make those connections. There are several organizations in Ohio. There are organizations in almost every state that try to do that now, because nationwide, one of our biggest problems, we have an aging workforce of farmers. Our farmers are getting older and there aren't as many people wanting to take that on. So we need farmers if we want to continue to have a secure, healthy food system in the United States. And so we got to get these first generation people on a farm, but getting access as a first generation farmer is the next obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to do this and replicate it, and we have seen it. We've actually seen it. We had a farmer family who they were first generation farmers. They did it. They did a great job, and they farmed organically. And they just kind of used kind of the similar model. They wanted a few pointers, and they went out and they publicly announced that they were retiring and wanted to find somebody to take over. And so it worked for them. So it definitely can work for a private landowner as well. And I would certainly encourage anyone with a farm property to reach out.
Mm-hmm. Great. Sarah, I was wondering if you wanted to give a plug for certified local government in Ohio and how the CLG system has been able to help financially support your efforts with the farmstead.
Oh, absolutely. The City of Green is a CLG, Certified Local Government, which means that we have a Historic Preservation Commission, and we have the ability to apply for CLG grant funds. Almost all of the projects that you saw in my presentation, not all, but the majority of them were funded in part by those CLG funds. They've been very generous with us over the years, and great partners too in terms of resources. When we were struggling with the barn roof and the materials, they came to visit to see for themselves and gave us some great advice. So yeah, I think at one point in time I tallied up how I think it's about $120,000 that we've gotten from CLG funds over the years. Yeah, a great
Wow,
program.
that's great. That really helps to make a difference.
Yeah, and $120,000 doesn't sound like a bunch until you understand that their annual budget for grants is usually right around the $90,000 level, and that's for the whole state of Ohio. So yeah, I think we've been very fortunate.
That's great to hear. Is there a reason? So noticing that barn roof project, in terms of dollars and cents, that was really expensive. What made that an expensive project?
Well, I'll qualify that by saying it wasn't as expensive as it would have been if we had replaced it with slate. We were given permission to replace it with a rubber composite material that looks very much like slate. It's beautiful. So there's the major part of that. Also, because we replaced the slate with a different kind of material, then the infrastructure for that was different. So there was another step. There's also, you saw the date. There was also included in that price the new lightning rods. There was quite a bit of gutter, downspout, and drainage work that had to happen to make sure that the water was running away from the barn correctly. And it's a big roof. It's just a really big roof. So it was quite the project.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Rachel, curious, I think you had mentioned that you had experience with working on organic farms, but I didn't catch if your farm is organic.
We haven't gone down the path of getting certified, but that is, I mean, I've always worked on organic farms. I've followed those kinds of procedures. I just haven't gotten certified with the state or gone through that kind of process.
Mm-hmm. And so moving in April, that doesn't give you a whole lot of time for prepping your land. Was the land leased formerly for agricultural purposes, and you were able to just kind of step in and pick it up with the next season of growing, or was there a lot of preparation that you had to do with the soil itself?
If only that was the case, Frank. It was very shrubby. It had not been used for anything for a long time. I think that somebody may have hayed the main field at some point in the last couple decades, but that's about it. So I have been digging out very large roots and fighting blackberries and poison ivy in my garden all year. And I moved in and basically had it tilled and immediately planted into it. And so that those early crops really were stunted because of not having time to really, rest the ground and work it up properly for the first time. If I had, control over the land in the fall, I probably would have done things a little bit different, but just means next year will be a little easier, I think.
Right. I hope you're not one of those people who's especially sensitive to poison ivy.
If I wasn't before, I am now. I think that me and my husband have both had it the entire season, to some degree. But hey, that's life I asked for. So,
So yeah, it's labor of love. So is there, so you do your farming full time, and I think a lot of people consider there's a myth that you can be a full-time farmer and not a full-time something or other. Do you fit more into the mold of being that full-time farmer, or are you a full-time farmer and a full-time something else?
the farm is definitely more than a full-time job. I think that the problem that you're describing, there's truth in that it's really hard for a small diversified farm in the way that we picture a farm, like on a cute postcard with like different kinds of animals and like, less than 100,000 acres of corn or whatever. It is
Right.
really hard to figure out how to make that into a full-time job that pays the bills. I think that you hear a lot about these, especially like older dairy farms folding, and they were in the family for generations, but in today's world, it's just so hard. Everybody has an off-farm job and they still can't pay to afford the farm. Part of why this is such a unique opportunity, leasing from the city of Green, is because I can afford to live at this farm. If I had, we looked briefly at what property prices were in kind of the greater northeastern Ohio area, and there's just no way we could ever afford 20 acres of farmland with usable outbuildings, with wells already drilled, near a metropolitan area that's going to be your customer base on our own. It's basically impossible. And unless you're coming in with a lot of money saved from former careers. And there are some people that kind of start their gentleman's farm in their retirement that way. But yeah, so it's a lifestyle. I work really, long hours during the summer to maintain it. And right now, with all like any fledgling business, I had a lot of expenses the first year, so I'm not taking a salary from it. But in the future, I really think that I will be able to. I'm hopeful for that future. I think that this kind of farming model has a lot of potential for resiliency. Like Tracy kind of talked a little bit about, is people buying direct from the farmer means that the farmer takes home more money than if you were selling through these mega food channels.
Mm-hmm. So Rachel and Tracy, maybe this is a question that both of you can address separately, is what about as far as equipment costs, especially for the beginning farmer? Rachel, you could go into mega debt just to outfit your operation with the equipment that we see when we're driving in rural Ohio every day, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I'm not I didn't build a business plan that required a lot of equipment. There's just different methods that you can use. If I was trying to grow grain or like make my own hay, then I absolutely need like a big tractor with a combine and things. And that is really tricky. But I'm doing things at a mostly human powered level right now. I'd like to buy a tractor for certain jobs, but like a small one. And we're saving up to pay that directly. Tracy, do you have more to add to that?
It's a legitimate question. What Rachel's doing, a lot of small farms can do that with human power, horsepower, or small equipment. It is affordable. You can even, buy used equipment, but it is a stumbling block. Just like any business, there is an upfront, cost doing business, and planning for that, having a good solid business plan is critical. And then really thinking through how you're going to operate. And doesn't mean you have to have those things. It just means you need a solution to get it done. So whether it's your uncle's cousin's neighbor who let you borrow or rent their machine, or whether you factor it into your business plan and you get to go buy one, or if you're going to do a lot of the work by hand at first and work toward that. So, and we have a farm in this program who uses all horsepower, and that's their primary equipment. So yeah, there's a lot of creative alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Great. I guess I've even heard about maybe like extension offices or the soil and water conservation districts where they will rent some selective pieces of equipment because it's you know, as I understand it, it's something you need maybe a couple weeks out of the year, and the other 50 weeks out of the year it's, you know, it's sitting there. It's a decoration in your barn, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And it would be great if, you know, we're trying to establish an equipment share, and I know there are other communities that have or are trying to, where, you know, you have a couple people who own these more expensive pieces in a group, you know, to lessen the cost, and everyone kind of takes care to keep them maintained and stored well. But again, when you're talking about sustainable, you know, a lot of the soil practices that small farms are using in these types of models, it minimizes the amount of equipment that they need as well. So the idea is to disturb the soil as much as to not disturb the soil. So you wouldn't really want some of these, you know, heavy plows or, you know, that all the time, maybe a once or twice at the onset, but then after that you would be working with cover crops and other management processes to minimize that. So
All right.
Absolutely.
I don't see any other questions coming across. We are just a little after 2 o'clock. Any last comments from the three of you, Sarah, Rachel, Tracy?
I just want to say I really I applaud the City of Green, and especially Sarah, for being just tenacious and committed to this idea and to bringing it to light. This isn't easy, but it's so necessary. Our food system is broken, our ecosystem is broken, and we throw things away like there's, you know, everything in life is disposable. And so to be able to preserve this beautiful historic farmstead, wow, you know, what, just from the historic preservation perspective, I mean, there's a win, but to be able to find a use for it means that it has more value and it's more likely to continue for generations now that it has this wonderful use. So, gosh, congratulations, you guys. And Rachel, you guys are just busting it. I mean, you're fantastic, and I love watching you guys. Everybody sign up to watch Southgate Farm on Facebook and stop at their farm stand when you're in Green. Visit
Oh.
Countryside too. If you want to know more, you can visit Countryside at Countryside Food and Farms.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect ending. I'm good.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us here today. Just last closing note, make sure you register to join us at our next webinar, which happens Tuesday, October 6th, beginning at 1 p.m. We'll be joined by Christy Tanner of Jobs Ohio to discuss their new Vibrant Communities program. You can find more info on that webinar and register for it by going to heritageohio.org. And last but not least, thank you to our Heritage Ohio members. Your contributions, great and small, make our webinar series possible. Have a great day, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah.